Hey guys, I have a fascinating interview coming up, and it's with Dr. Scott Tinker. Maybe you haven't heard of him. I haven't heard of him before last week, and I was at a field trip in the middle of the DJ Basin in Denver when I met him, and the company had him do a presentation, talk about the macro part of energy. At first glance, just listening to that, you might say, oh, okay, it's boring. It was probably one of the top 10 presentations I've ever seen, which is saying something because I've seen thousands of these, read thousands of them, I presented everywhere in numerous countries around. And it was from the perspective that was non-biased about energy, talking about clean energy, which is no clean energy, but not so much where, oh, these guys are idiots if they're thinking about solar, if they're thinking about EVs and things like that. I mean, this guy has been doing this for 40 years. He's a CEO of Tinker Energy Associates, chairman of the Switch Energy Alliance. Switch is a couple of documentaries I produced. He has numerous videos and education material on basically every form of energy. He interviews some of the top people in the world within these fields on that site. He used to be a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, director emeritus of the Bureau of Economic Geology, just a global energy explorer, an educator. He's done over close to 1,000 keynote lectures to audiences around the world. You'll see even during this interview, he's just spoke at, I believe it was California. He's going to other countries. I mean, the guy just speaks every place. From his perspective, his goal is talking about the dual challenges of producing more energy, which is needed. And not just needed, but you could see, developed world, and we live in America and stuff like that, but there's a lot of poor countries where you see the lower cost of electricity leads to greater economic growth. And we could see that with Europe, where they're not growing nearly as fast over the past 20 years, like 20% compared to like 300% for the US, 500% for China, because the cost of electricity is so high. So how do we do this? How do we get it to everyone around the nation, which helps poverty? But coming from a non-biased source, this is what this podcast is about. It's going to both sides, or listening to both sides of the story, and I feel like everyone knows the climate change story and how the world's going to end and stuff like that, and scaring the shit out of people, and then you have the other end saying, like, it's all hoax. And there's a massive, massive middle, guys, that you have to pay attention to. So Scott is great at this, and his presentation was fascinating. I want to know what you thought afterwards. Let's get to that interview right now, and hopefully it blew you away as much as it blew me away when I was interviewing. Here it is right now. Dr. Scott Tinker, thanks so much for joining us on Wall Street Unplugged.
It's great to be here with you, Frank. Thanks.
You approach energy from a non-biased standpoint, where a lot of times we're hearing, even politically, is it a hoax? Is it not a hoax? And you're using data and facts and figures that just blew me away. And I want to start there with the whole climate change and energy. Someone's been covering this industry for such a long time and call themselves an educator. Could you give us your opinion about, clean energy, what we need to know about it, how it's going to help the world? Is it actually clean? Like questions like this that you address that I haven't heard anyone address from a non-biased point just blew me away. But I want to start with that and really get in deep with some of the things when it comes to individual clean energies like solar, like wind, like EVs. But I want to start with the clean energy theory, because it feels like the last 10 years it's been so distorted. You have two sides that are just like, it's real, it's not real. What's your perspective on this? And I know it's a very big question to start out with, but that's the first one I am going to ask you.
There's lots of words out there like green and clean and sustainable and all sorts of words, and they really don't mean much. I try to be as specific as I can. So I think when people talk clean these days, at least in the wealthy world, the developed world, they're talking about low emissions to the atmosphere, CO2 and methane. That's what most people would think. But if you think a bit more broadly, I'm old. I grew up with the land, the air, and the water as the environment that we needed to protect, and we still do. So to me, there's four pillars of that: the land, the air, the water, and the atmosphere. And we've got to try to protect all of those. No form of energy is perfectly clean, if you will. They all have different kinds of impacts on the land, the air, the water, and the atmosphere. And the goal, the objective function, is to balance those out and try to protect our environment as much as we can.
I want to tackle each one of these individually, because we look at EVs. EVs are the future. We're going to see tens of millions of cars produced. We're seeing that already. But nobody really talks about the batteries. They talk about it, the lithium and the extraction of lithium. But some of the things that you said where it's how many batteries, I want you to tell us how many batteries actually go into a Tesla vehicle, and get into the raw material part of how much EVs in terms of mineral intensive they are compared to, combustible engines and things like that. Because when you look at the facts and the figures, it's okay. Again, we're not taking any sides here, but look at the facts and figures. You understand a lot of this stuff isn't as clean as you think, right?
Well, optionality matters in energy and everything, really. So I don't mind EVs. They have a role to play, but not the only role. The challenge with them is the fuel is not very dense. And by that, I mean on an energy per weight basis, Frank. there's not much density in a battery. A lot more density in liquid fuels like gasoline and diesel. So that means you have to have a lot of weight, fuel weight in the car to do what gasoline would do, 1,000 pounds in a battery. Now, I say a battery, it's really a pack of batteries. Think of, well, on the big ones, the big sedans, think of 1,000 cell phones in one car, you know, and that's kind of your little EV. A Tesla S, the big sedan, has about 6,000 to 7,000 cell phones in one car. That's a lot. So if there are 1.4 billion vehicles in the world today, and vehicle cars and scooters and anything with a battery and a motor is called a vehicle, but let's say 1.4 billion. We've electrified about 60 to 65 million so far. There's a lot more to go, depending on where you want to push that. But start doing math. A billion vehicles, 5,000, to make it simple, is 5 trillion new batteries. And in 15 or 20 years, they wear out. You have to make them over and over. So this is not a sustainable thing in the classic sense that people might think. All that stuff, all those metals to make those batteries comes from the earth. We mine it somewhere in the world. China controls the processing of that. We manufacture those into batteries around factories. We put them in vehicles and a lot of transportation in all those steps. And then they wear out and we dump them into landfills. And you'd say, well, don't we recycle them? No, we really don't much because that's expensive. We dump them in landfills and we do it again. So this is the challenge. There's about 600% more metals in an electric vehicle than in a combustion engine. And not in the chassis, it's in the fuel, in the battery. 600% more metals. And that may be okay, again, for some uses, but not for all uses.
And you bring up a great presentation. If you guys could see this on a YouTube channel, you know, we're going to bring up amazing slides. And this what blew me away when I saw your presentation. We look at the raw materials for power and transport, and you say, you know, transportation, and when you look at the EVs, I think it was 700% more mineral intensive. And you provide all the minerals here, lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, graphite, blah, 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 silicon, everything else. But you also talk about solar and wind are 600% more mineral intensive than conventional fuels. How come that doesn't get more publicity in the media where, you know, we're just pushing these clean fuel agenda? And it's okay. We're not saying that you don't use them, but let's be honest and transparent about them, because at the end of the day, you're a guy that I see, and for me, and I may be wrong on this, but your chief concern, you traveled to 65 countries. I feel like you've been doing this for 3-4 decades, maybe even longer. But it's how to provide energy, and enough energy where everyone has access to it. We're looking at 600 million people do not have access to electricity. And these are things that you care about. You visit these poor countries and showing how, you know, energy is the future, no matter what kind of energy, but you want to do it on a responsible way where, you know, it's you helping the environment as much as you can, right? How come this doesn't get more publicity, you think, where you know, the truth about how much we're 700% more mineral intensive EVs than combustible engines and 600% more mineral intensive than conventional fuels for solar and wind? How come it doesn't get more attention?
We probably both understand that there are agendas out there, and energy underpins everything in the world. So the political agendas, the NGO agendas, the academic agendas, the industry agendas, even the church has an agenda around energy. So this is a global phenomenon. You mentioned something very critical. You mentioned 600 million people without access to electricity at all. But it's actually much worse than that, Frank. There are only about 1.3 billion of us in the developed, wealthy world. 7 billion people live in some state of energy poverty, from extreme, none, to intermittent, not affordable, not reliable to them. 7 billion, most of the world. And that's unsustainable. That's about the only time I ever use that word. When you see such disparity in wealth, because energy is directly tied to wealth. The more energy you consume up to a point, the more wealth you generate per person, per country. So when you have a lot of people pinned in energy poverty, not much energy, not much wealth, and the rich world just keeps pulling away, that doesn't end well. It never ends well. We've got to get energy to the whole world. I'm not talking about light bulbs and mud huts. By the way, I've installed those. Solar in Conchuqua, Colombia, the indigenous Arhuaco village, they need it. They got started, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about energy prosperity. So we've got to get the whole world to come there. And I just don't think most of us, not our fault, we were born into circumstances where we don't understand what the rest of the world looks like and how they actually live. We won the lottery, okay? All the developed world. But we've got to begin to recognize the impact on the whole world of that kind of disparity. And energy really underpins all of it.
When people speak about this, I feel like there's a lot of opinions, but what you've done is you really provide facts. And I love one of these things that I took from one of your papers is you talk about the high cost of electricity tends to drive down economic productivity, and you show it. We see the result of this trend over the last 2 decades where Europe's economy has grown by about 20%. Right, while the United States has grown by 200%, China by 500%. What's Europe getting wrong here? Because you're seeing the high cost of electricity, and our electricity costs are all going up, but it still seems relatively cheap. I mean, how could Europe change that? Because it is a direct relationship to how the higher cost of energy are leading to slow economic growth compared to all the other developed worlds. How do they change this policy? Do they change this policy? Is it possible for them? Because it seems like, this is a pretty big deal, especially if you wanted to invest in Europe.
Western Europe leaders are passionate about the environment. They believed what they were told, that solar and wind and batteries would be both more affordable and more reliable. They are neither. And again, I'm not against solar and wind. They have roles to play. But the data they were showing was something called the levelized cost of energy, the LCOE. That's the cost of electricity where it's generated at the plant gate, at the turbine, at the panel, at the natural gas power plant, at the coal power plant. That's the cost of the electron there. You still have to get it from there to a consumer. And because solar and wind aren't always available, not judgment, just the physics, the sun's not out and the wind doesn't blow, you have to have something there redundant to back those up. And they have to be called on in real time to provide all the electricity that is needed when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. That's very expensive. Reliability of grids with intermittent sources is very expensive. That's why the cost of electricity, in part, is much higher in Western Europe and in California than it is in places that have less penetration of those. Again, solar and wind have a role to play. Texas has a lot of wind, but you have to balance those out. And I'm not sure our decision makers either fully understand the challenges here or have decided to act otherwise because of their constituencies. So some of the very loud voices have been promoting this and continue to do so. Look what happened in Spain. We still haven't been told really yet, but people do know. Physics knows what happened in Spain just last week.
Yeah,
blackouts. So this is the challenge of large penetration of intermittent sources and trying to back those up. Now, optionality is great. I love the idea of having natural gas and nuclear and even some coal in parts of the world and solar and wind and hydro and geothermal. Optionality is great. Makes for a more robust portfolio. People on Wall Street understand portfolios completely. But you wouldn't put all your money in one stock only and hope it's a winner, right? It's just crazy.
So you talk about the politics. I think we all know, politics, okay, constituents. We get it, right? A lot of money behind a lot of lobbying dollars, and they're going to do what's in their best interest, I think, which we've seen over the past few years. I think everyone has seen it. But let's talk about some of the agencies, the big agencies that cover this, provide statistics, and you take their statistics and say, okay, wait a minute. Since your numbers got a data guy, you say, okay, we want to use more lithium, we want to use EV batteries, and you come up with this chart right here where, okay, so based on these forecasts, right, these data, that you're using is supposed to be independent from that track all energy and things like that. You look at worldwide lithium demand supply, and you push this out to 2035 and say, okay, you guys are talking about world filled with EVs, and but yet when you look at the total demand what's expected for EVs, and you look at the worldwide lithium demand and supply, you're looking at total demand, and you have supply here where you have unfinanced projects, recycled supply, operational supply, and we're not even doing recycling yet. I think you said really, but unfinanced projects. I mean, you're looking at demand outpacing supply by more than double, and you're not even going out that far. You're going out to 2035, right? I mean, so forget about the politicians. We know what their agenda is. We know what their motivation is. But what about the guys in this industry that are supposed to be independent to provide statistics? I look at this, you look at this and say, okay, this doesn't make sense. So if you show it to them, what do they come back and say to you?
That doesn't even really include the demand from AI and data centers, okay?
Amazing.
And the electricity demand there is going to be phenomenal, as we all know, and it needs to be on all the time. You can't have air conditioners going off in data and AI centers or things don't work. So half of that energy is air conditioning or heating, and half is the equipment itself. So the demand goes up even higher. I don't think people want to really understand it. What I typically hear is, well, there's plenty of lithium in the world. There's enough lithium in the oceans to do all this. Well, yeah, and there's enough gold in the oceans too, but it's really finely disseminated and expensive to get it out. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of this detachment of resource and economics that happens. We have a lot of lithium in the United States, a big deposit in Maine, in spodumene. I'm a geologist, great deposit. They won't mine it, Frank. They don't want to mine. Okay, that's a choice. But why are you also mandating electric vehicles? This is the detachment that goes on between the resource, the economics, and what we want or think that we need. And we're coming to reality here because who's supplying all of this stuff? China. China, brilliantly. Not China bashing. In fact, I'm complimenting China. They don't have that much natural gas and oil supply, so they went out and purchased the rights to process all of these metals in the world. They process about 80% of the world's key metals and rare earth elements in China. This is a brilliant strategy, the Belt and Roads and other initiatives. They need EVs. They're making about half of the world's EVs today. They need the batteries that go in them. They're the leading manufacturers and producers of solar panels and wind turbines. They need that. They want to export that to the world. Good for China. China will mine. Now, there might be human rights issues involved here. They can also do it very cheaply because of labor costs and all sorts of other things that China enjoys that competitive markets don't. So this is the challenge. I think we're kind of closing our eyes and saying, we'll just get this stuff from Asia. We'll bring it here and we'll deploy it and we'll be green. Well, this isn't green, especially in an emissions game. This is a shell game because China, when producing all this stuff, uses coal, a lot of coal, and other things too. A lot of coal. So their emissions go into our one atmosphere. We're not helping the climate by exporting our production and manufacturing somewhere else and bringing it here on diesel barges, Amazon trucks, one item at a time through our businesses and our homes. It's nuts.
It is nuts. And I just put up a chart here just showing resource extraction processing, but the processing part is with China where, guys, if you're not seeing this, again, it's on a YouTube channel, rare earths is counts for, this is the processing in China. Over 85% it looks like. Lithium is close to 60%. Cobalt is over 60%. Nickel and copper, pretty much 35 to 40%. And funny question to you is, we're in the middle of negotiations and it sounds like that we have things are going well now with China. They weren't. But from someone who looks at this from the mineral side and seeing how much we need China and China needs us, when you see the back and forth in tariffs, are you kind of laughing and saying, okay, guys, when are you just going to come to a solution? Because it seems like you both need each other, but just seeing the processing with China and the fact that, how much they process in terms of mining and minerals, I mean, there had to be a deal. It's probably always going to be a deal, but just the back and forth. I mean, what were your thoughts when you're seeing the tariff nonsense and stuff like that? Because someone who's really behind the scenes, it's probably laughable for you.
A lot of opinions about tariffs, and I have some of my own. I think let me take it slightly different. Yes, we need China and China needs us. We need Asia. Asia needs us. So far, we're a great market for the things that Asia produces. So that's symbiotic, and they make a lot of stuff more affordably than we can here. So that's a symbiotic relationship. If you listen closely, as you do and many do, there's interesting partnerships forming between China and Russia and India. Narendra Modi is looking east and west of the Middle East. Mohammed bin Salman opening up a lot of things now. There's these coalitions forming, and those are huge markets. Again, 7 billion people don't live in the developed world. These are markets that are opening to Asia, and they will have options for their products that aren't just in the West anymore. We need China, unless we're willing to start opening up and mining again and drilling and manufacturing and doing a lot of the things that we haven't done for a while. We may need China more than China needs us as this rolls out. And I think Xi Jinping understands this extremely well. Okay. So Mr. Trump may be a great negotiator. Sometimes I wonder, sometimes I see it. I think Xi Jinping is a great negotiator, and I know Vladimir Putin is. I don't like all his negotiations and his actions and in the way he handles most things, but he's cagey. Okay. So this is a global challenge of the first order. And I lived through the Cold War. This is a different kind. And we got to get pretty self-aware very quickly that our security, not just energy security, but total security, relies on the globe. That's just how things have been set up. And we got to understand that quickly and clearly. We got to be very sanguine about that.
I want to transition to coal, because I think you have a stat here that says, and this is from your 2022. Again, I watched a lot of your presentations, especially your TED Talk, that coal supplies 47% of energy needs, and oil is more like 27%. Natural gas is 12%. I don't know, again, that was a couple of years ago. But the point is that the amount of coal we still use, maybe we don't use as much, right? But China does, and we know that, and we're okay with that. I mean, when you're looking at the dynamics of saying, okay, it's okay for China to use coal, and then, like you said, with an Amazon truck ship us down, all the products and things like that. What are your thoughts in terms of, is there clean coal? Could we help the environment, or is just giving it, pass it on, that saying, hey, you guys deal with it, and nobody says everything, everybody keeps quiet, but you guys produce really cheap because the energy you're using is incredibly cheap. What are your thoughts on coal? I mean, is it ever going away? Is there clean coal? Is there, some kind of optionality where we could use coal and help the environment? Because China's not going to stop using it, are they?
Coal is still growing in the world. We used more coal last year than ever before. Now, it's been plateauing in its percentage and actual numbers, so it's not growing at the rate that it was. Natural gas is growing at a tremendous rate. So when you think about fossil fuels, those would be coal, oil, and natural gas. You see the mix changing. Natural gas, more. Oil, stable. Coal, less. But combined, there's still just over 80% of the world's total energy, primary energy consumption, comes from coal, oil, and natural gas. The thought that these are going to go away, and by the way, that's come down from 85% 60 years ago. Okay, 85 to 80%. Look, so these things don't change quickly. Percentage terms, actual terms still going up. Do we need coal? Of course. It's a very affordable, reliable fuel for most of Asia. And Europe, UK built on it, Germany built on it, the US built on coal. And then we've transitioned to other things. There's a fascinating relationship. It's really important. Energy underpins the economy, and healthy economies can afford to invest in the environment. And it runs that way, Frank. Energy, economy, environment. So we almost have to accelerate through economic growth to be able to afford to clean up the whole environment. And the acceleration into prosperity is very important to me, not only for human needs and human flourishing, but for our environment. And that's a little tricky thought for most people to make. They get the human flourishing piece, but they really haven't fully comprehended that. And I heard 3 speakers yesterday from 3 different Indian reservations. I was out in Sanford speaking, and one said, we need more coal to get off of coal. Hadn't ever heard it put that way, but that's exactly right.
That is interesting. That really is interesting. And even when you look at coal and we look at solar and wind, when you look at the statistics, and I've seen this from numerous sources, but you actually had a slide of this as well about the total projected global waste by 2050. Can't we talk about how, hey, wind and solar are good, but, there is a part that you need to talk about that I feel like nobody talks about. And when you bring up this chart and showing the total projected global waste by 2050 when it comes to solar, when it comes to wind, I mean, you have to factor these things in when you're looking at clean energy policies, right? But I feel like from a public standpoint, our politicians, they don't really explain this part to us. It's just like, hey, no more fossil fuels, zero. Could we ever get to zero emissions? I mean, is that even possible ever, even if you're looking 30, 40 years from now?
No, you can't. Even net zero, not just zero emissions, net zero, which means we are capturing and pulling more out, as much out, and that helps to offset the emissions. You can't even get there. So, and that's okay. We can certainly reduce our emissions, which would be very helpful. And the reason is you can't electrify everything. This is a great example. You and I visited a drilling site together, and we went to the hydraulic fracturing piece of that. And all that equipment was running on electricity, huge, fat, pipes of electricity. And there were these two, I think they were 15 megawatt generators, two of them sitting right there, producing all the electricity for that site. And then they stopped telling us. And I looked beyond that and I saw these big trucks and they said H2, CNG and things on them, which is compressed natural gas and hydrogen. Mm-hmm. And I said, so you're using natural gas to make the electricity right here? Yes, sir, we are. I said, so we're burning fossil fuels to make electricity to run all these efficient motors. And by the way, an electric motor is much more efficient than a combustion engine. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's important. Much more efficient. But the fuel itself, if in an electric car, that's a less efficient fuel. We've talked about that. But here's fossil fuels, here's electricity, and then we're running all these motors. So that we could say, well, that's an electrified site. But where does the electricity come from? It doesn't grow on trees. Lightning makes it naturally, but we haven't figured out how to capture that yet. So we have to make electrons. We have to create them from various processes. And we need a lot of electricity. So this is the challenge, I think, when you start going to scale. Such an important word, scale. Okay? When you go to scale with anything, coal has huge impacts, mining and burning, SOx, NOx, mercury, particulates, CO2, oil and natural gas, the drilling, moving, burning. When you start building solar panels and wind turbines at scale, and maybe electrifying half of those 1.4 billion vehicles, 700 million vehicles, we have 60 today. Where does it all come from? And where does it go? And that's what I told 1,100 kids in a TED Talk. I said, because everything comes from the earth, we manufacture it into energy collection systems, and they wear out. They all do. Wind turbines, 15 to 20 years. Solar panels, 15 to 20 years. We dump them back in the earth, and we do it over and over. It's not renewable. And I looked them in the eyes and said, there's no renewable energy. That's just a myth you've been told. And I laughed because I didn't know. That might have been my last lecture.
Well, there's so many places I want to go with this, where, I guess we'll save the electricity generation part, is where do you see the majority of that? Because we see electricity demand, and I think electricity demand is something I studied, for the last 5 years. I'm very much into AI and telling everybody that the amount of electricity we need, I don't think people understand. They think they do, but I don't think they really understand the amount of electricity we needed. We're going to need. Where is that going to come from? Is it going to come from, more solar? Well, you have Elon Musk saying, listen, if you look at the data, solar eventually is going to be the primary source of energy. Again, he could be talking his book, which is fine, and I understand CEOs do that. But, is it going to be natural gas? Is it oil? Are we just going to, unleash these floodgates, which Trump wants to do, where much more production is coming? Where's the fuel going to come from? Which we're going through nuclear, but nuclear, a lot of the deals that have been signed by these AI companies are really going out 10, 20 years before this stuff really starts producing. So, where are we going to get, what's the primary source of the energy that we're going to need to fuel electricity needs, not just in the U.S., but globally?
Electricity represents about 25% of total energy consumption globally, 25 growing to 30%. So let's call it even a third. The other 2/3 is molecules, but it's a very important part and it is growing. It's going to come from all that. It depends where you live and what your resources are. Every source of electricity, the sun, the wind, geothermal, hydro, waves, tides, burning molecules, coal, oil, natural gas, getting heat from uranium and thorium for nuclear. Those are all resources that come from the earth. So people use what they have where they have it to make electricity. Again, portfolios, optionality. A stable electricity portfolio has lots of different inputs. Not everybody is blessed with a lot of inputs. Texas is. We have it all. But not everybody does. The trend, I disagree with Elon on this. The first form of energy was the sun. It grew the hay that our vehicles, oxen and mules, used to pull hay. They pulled their own food. That was thousands of years ago. We're going toward dense. If I were to take, this is a nice analogy. So in a nuclear power plant, there are fuel rods that you put little uranium pellets in them. That uranium pellet is about a centimeter tall, half a centimeter wide, one pellet. Okay. Stuff them in, then they activate them. That pellet, that little pellet, contains enough energy to drive a car from New York City to LA and back to Dallas. One pellet. Okay. So that's dense. Nuclear is 1,000,000 times denser than wood and dung and batteries. So we are headed, physics, it's hard to negotiate with physics. Physics at the end of the day wins. And again, not judgment, but we're headed toward, and we have been, denser forms of energy. We've left wood, we've left hay and dung, coming through coal into liquids, oil, natural gas, a gas, CH4, 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens, is denser than all of those by weight, and even denser still by orders of magnitude is nuclear. So we are going toward nuclear. That's the way the world is going. China and Russia, no surprise, are building 70% of the world's large nuclear reactors today. They get it. They need to electrify their economies. The U.S., I think the time has come. We're going to catch up. We led in the 60s and 70s. We let it go after 3 Mile Island. We are importing our uranium oxides. We're doing crazy things. On a safety basis, the kilowatt hour from a nuclear power plant is safer than any other form by far. Those are the data on human lives. So we got to get past the misplaced fear. We got to manage it very well, but the U.S. needs to go again. And I know this is going to work for 2 reasons. The tech sector has opened up and said, hey, we need a lot of electricity, and it's not going to be solar and wind because our demand centers need it 24/7, 365, reliable, affordable, always. That's either going to be natural gas or nuclear. Nuclear will take a little bit longer. That's one reason. The other reason is kids aren't scared of it. I was trained to be scared of nuclear. I got under a desk in kindergarten during the Cold War because I knew that desk would protect me from nuclear bombs somehow. You know, we were just hitting our children.
Yeah.
But I was terrified. Okay. Kids today aren't scared of nuclear. They've been trained to be scared of climate change, but not of nuclear. So young people are going, hey, high density, electric always on, affordable when it's built, no emissions. Give me some of that. So I think things are converging and we're going to move now. Okay. We're going to move into nuclear again, which is eventually where things are going to end up for the most part.
And it seems like that fits your thesis of adding energy and reducing emissions, especially when you see this chart again, like the projected global waste by 2050. Again, this is someone else, International Renewable Energy, but just the nuclear, how, like you said, dense, how much we could produce. Again, that might take a little bit of a while, but it seems like it solves your objective, right? Which is to really understand these technologies. You showed pictures of, wind turbines, like I think you said there's 40,000 or something in Texas, and now they're getting old. So what do? They got to take them down and they throw them back into the ground, right? And then you saw solar, and you showed pictures of, hey, people don't show these, but look, in a hailstorm, what do you do with all these solar panels when you got to replace them? Like, people don't talk about that, but it seems like that is a really great solution. Do you see perception changing? I mean, it seems like it's changing, right? You're seeing, especially in the U.S., but how long is that going to take? Because we do have a ton of not production, but we do have a ton of uranium. I mean, I know you know this, but some people don't, where, 30, 40 years ago, all the oil companies were producing uranium at one point, right? So we know where the uranium is. It's just a matter of producing it. Do you see the U.S. getting more involved in that? Do you think it could be quicker? And again, that might be a tough question, but I was curious your thoughts, because it seems like nuclear solves a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here.
It does. It addresses a lot of the electricity side, and it can even be used for heat. We need a lot of heat to make steel and cement, and we're always going to need molecules for fertilizers and plastics and other things. But it does address quite a bit of the electricity side. It will take some time. And we're just talking about fission. Fusion is still coming. I'll be in DC on Monday, actually interviewing president of Westinghouse talking about nuclear, and the head of Georgia Power talking about nuclear. They built the 2 most recent reactors in the U.S. So it is. We got to get back on track. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to begin to regulate, but not over-regulate, install a lot of the protests and environmental challenges that go on forever. Won't allow a CEO and a pro forma to do this at all. It's just too risky. So that has to be done well, and then said, that's enough. We're going to build these. They've passed all the hurdles. The Biden administration, to their credit, was pro-nuclear near the end. And so is Chris Wright, was a very close friend of mine, the Secretary of Energy now, and he's pro-nuclear. So I think when you're pro-energy, you understand the physics and the economics of these things and where we're headed. And now it's just a matter of continuing to move away from carbon toward non-carbon, hydrogen, and no hydrocarbons at all, which is nuclear.
You brought up something that is scary about mining, and how young people are told about mining, and how, the whole climate change, and you mentioned how that scares the crap out of them, right? That this kind of false narrative of, hey, you don't have to scare these people. We just have to be conscious of it. But you brought up this chart, which I found fascinating. College graduates' working preferences. And you just breaking down by colors would definitely wouldn't work, probably wouldn't work. And you have them broken down to mining, oil and gas, construction, all the way down to the bottom at high tech and healthcare. And you could see high tech and healthcare probably would, their preferences definitely would, which is really good. But when you look at mining, holy cow. I mean, you're looking at what, 70%? Definitely wouldn't or probably wouldn't really go into that field. Oil and gas is up there as well. To me, that's just a crazy statistic because what you're explaining, the big point here is we need minerals. We need extraction. There's massive energy, right? We have to fill our energy needs. It's the greatest thing ever. It's great for economic growth. We want to do it in an environmental friendly way. But yet our kids who are graduates are not really focused on this field because they see it as a negative. Isn't that going to create even more than today of a supply demand imbalance? Because, where are we going to get the bright minds to really go into the mining industry to pull us to innovate, to find these new technologies like we found with fracking and things like that?
Yeah, and again, those are U.S. data. Globally, that's not the case. You see people, I've been to China many times. There's the University of Petroleum, 50,000 students. There's a University of Coal, okay? There's a mining university. Globally, people are going into these extractive industries, and they're great jobs for them. They bus kids from middle school to these conventions and conferences in the extractive industries. So this is more of a Western Europe, U.S. phenomenon. And if you look at our graduate programs here in the U.S. and things like petroleum engineering, 90% or more are international students coming over to study, paid by their governments, and then going back. Not our U.S.-born students who would stay and work here, presumably. So this is a major, major challenge. They don't see jobs here in it. We're not mining. Well, some administrations are trying to shut down oil and gas. So kids are bright. They're not hearing positive things. And so why would they go into that? The narrative needs to begin to evolve, recognizing that just because we mine and drill over there doesn't make it green. And because those forms of energy are going to underpin our economies for decades to a century, we need to continue to do these things and have the talent base. This is an education challenge. And I appreciate you, Frank, and people like you being willing to share with your audiences some of these data and some of the reality. I just don't think most of us think about it. Our IQs and energy are pretty low in this country because they don't have to be high. We've always had it. It's always there for us, affordable, reliable. We just assume it and we move on. But that's not going to be the case. And you see more brownouts and blackouts coming in the U.S. Ask yourself, why is that? And you hear it's going to be cheaper, but your power bill is doubled. Why is that? You got to believe your own eyes. Not what you're hearing and reading and wherever you feed yourself, but ask yourself, has there been more brownouts? Is it more expensive? Why is that? Really, why is it? And that is really what we've been talking about.
And why is it? I mean, is this just like a political agenda, or, when I look at Al Gore and how much traction, that presentation got, and I know we had Leonardo DiCaprio, you have actors and stuff like that to sell it even better. But for me, I always pride myself in doing this podcast for 15 years is I want to get the real story. When you find the real story, I don't care what anyone else is saying. I want to be there. I want to talk to professionals. I want to know why. Like it's just constantly question yourself, right? When I first started looking at fracking, I really thought I was going to go to these areas and I visit every major shale area that I was going to go. There's going to be dead animals all over the place, right? When I first went there, because that's what I thought, just HBO specials saying how terrible it was. And then I learned about the technology and said, wait a minute, this doesn't cause water contamination unless someone takes the water and dumps it in a lake. That's different. Why do you think something like, Al Gore and that agenda gets so much attention, but nobody wants to see the other side of the story? Is it being suppressed? Is it just like people don't want to understand it? Because knowing both sides of this, look, I saw you in the field. You care. You're visiting these poor countries. You're showing how these people would benefit from energy no matter what it is. And you are someone who cares about the environment. But why is this such an agenda where it has to be black and white, in your opinion?
And the binary, clean, dirty, good, bad, believer, denier, we brought in religious terms to this dialogue. I think part of it is Al Gore probably was concerned about the quote hockey stick of CO2 emissions. Unfortunately, they made a lot of ties of that to other things. Yes, the planet's warming some, forced by human activity. But when you start to look at the impacts on extreme weather of that warming, that's where the story ends in many ways. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that meets every year, shows this in their own data. I can send you the sources of that. They show that with statistical confidence, high confidence, they can't say that most of these extreme weather events have left the past yet. They are 6, Working Group 1, Chapter 12, Table 12.12 for your listeners. Go there, and you'll see a bunch of white space. It hasn't left the historical past yet and may not for a long time. So there's this oh no story, and that's real. And then there's the conflation of that with the impacts of it. And then we get into the economics that the cost to mitigate that, to slow down the emissions into our single atmosphere, would be trillions and trillions of dollars, like 4 to 6 trillion a year. Some of the data I'm seeing now are more to mitigate. And it probably won't happen for the reasons we've already talked about in Asia. We want them to make stuff cheap with coal so we can have it. Adapting to climate is still expensive, but you see the results of that action and you can protect yourself from it. So I think we're just not having these dialogues, and part of it is the voter base, part of it is the NGO sources of money, part of it is the politics of our leading academic institutions, part of it is what young people want a cause to fight for and believe in and be passionate about. We all did. And so it all starts to come, and then the energy industry itself hasn't always been, transparent, kind of opaque about things that are going on. It all comes together and it's scary. Let's get our heads around something that we can do together that will have an impact. Let's end energy poverty for real. Not light bulbs and mud huts, but global flourishing. And let's grow the economies, and that allows us to protect our environment. Let's do that. It's a little more complex than net zero, but this 50 megawatt hour, $50,000 in 50 years, that's our thing, 50-50-50 at the energy core. That's very positive, and we can achieve it in the next 50 years with a movement of, particularly led by young people, get out in the world and they see the impact of their actions and the results on human flourishing in the environment. That's where we got to go. We got to give them a better story.
No, that's great. Yeah, we definitely got to give them a better story. So I want to end with this. I want you to talk about Switch, because this is where you produce world-class collection of energy education materials, programs. It's switchon.org. You have feature films, documentaries about this stuff, 101 site visits, expert interviews. Talk about that, because if people want to learn more and just go in there and take a look at this, and a lot of it, again, is just data showing both sides of the story. Talk about that, because that's fascinating. I think a lot of people could really learn a lot more about you doing that as well.
Back in 2008, first month Obama, I was asked to be Assistant Secretary of Energy and visited the OE, and it wasn't a great fit, so I actually visited twice. But that's when in 2008 I decided to start making films with Harry Lynch, who's a tremendous filmmaker. He's the brains. I'm just the pretty face and all these things. But we made a film called Switch, and we visited a dozen countries and looked at the best forms of energy, each form of energy where it's done best. Solar in Spain, nuclear in France, wind in Copenhagen, et cetera, et cetera. And we showed the pros and cons, the challenges in each of those and the benefits of each of those. It was the first film that kind of looked at the so-called energy transition and concluded that it's really not happening. We just keep adding new forms, and portfolios matter. Very powerful, 50 countries, lots of languages, got picked up in schools, K through 12, and college campuses are still showing it. Several years later, we got back together and made a film called Switch On, because we had left off half the world. Switch On looks at the world that doesn't have much energy poverty. And I think we were the first film to look at energy poverty. We filmed our timing was terrible. We filmed in 2008 and 2009 during the Great Recession. And then we released Switch On in January of 2020, right before COVID. But that brings you to 6 different countries. And we show you the different things that are happening around the world as people try to lift themselves up from energy poverty into economic prosperity. And all that together with a bunch of other things as part of the Switch Energy Alliance. We make educational materials for K through 12, for campuses, for public, and for professional education. And it continues to grow. It's a 501c3. I push my time and money into it, but we have a real staff and pay real people to do all these things. I host a PBS show, which your viewers particularly would be interested in, called Energy Switch. We just filmed our 7th season. We're in 110 million households nationally on PBS. I host 2 guests on every episode, really high-level people, each of these topics we've been talking about and many more. They don't agree on everything, Frank. We have civil dialogue. We reduce it to 25 minutes. We film for an hour and a half, highly produced in studio. You can stream them. We're on podcasts. But I would, go dive in. If you want to know about hydrogen, we got an episode. If you want to know about CCS, we got a couple episodes. Nuclear, multiple episodes. Dive into those and hear the top leading thinkers in the world discuss these things.
I always prepare for these interviews, right? I give my guests the respect of that, and just, the hours of research and stuff that I was seeing, even the one that you put up where the lights and you show the world and the lights. And of course, everyone's seen that, right? Most people have seen that with, the light generation, where do you see the most lights in the world, right? Through electricity. But then you say, hey, we're trying to reduce, people are saying we want to reduce, fossil fuel usage. And you put a pie chart in every country of the amount of coal, natural got, oil, fossil fuels that they use, and solar or wind. And if you take that away, the pie is like this big. And then you actually bring it back on and say, this is what it would look like, because, with 80% of it gone, this is how dark the world, I love the way you put things in perspective for people, where it's not just statistics, you're using pictures and stuff like that to make it understand. And getting everyone together on both sides is a key here. And just the takeaways for my audience is, the middle extraction that you're going to need, the politics behind it. I mean, just the technologies behind it. Learning about hydrogen, learning about coal in different areas and stuff, it can lead to lots of ideas within the stock market, which is why I see you probably going on these field trips and stuff with individual companies. So to me, that's fascinating. Hopefully my audience thinks it's fascinating as I thought it was, but I really appreciate you coming on. It means a lot because I know how busy you are and educated me, and I know you probably educate a lot of my audience today. And that's what this podcast is all about.
Let's stay in touch. I'm happy to engage whenever I can.
Great interview. Just takeaways. Why is this important to you? Because this is a stock podcast. One is the amount of minerals that we're going to need to extract is freaking insane. It's almost like Bitcoin and people who were buying Bitcoin 10 years ago saying it's going to be the biggest thing ever. And you wait, and now it is, where it's 100,000. If you're looking at copper projects, if you're looking at cobalt projects, if you're looking at just, even when it comes to oil and natural gas, you're going to have much more extraction to fill our energy needs. And there's thousands of stock ideas literally around the world, good maybe few hundred of these things that are going to benefit tremendously. And some of them that are kind of full of shit about AI and things like that and energy transition. AI is for real. It's a trend. It's going to be around forever, probably well past my lifetime. It's going to require much, much more energy, which people don't understand. I feel like people still don't understand. I mean, we're just on large language models. We're not even talking about agentic AI. And then, the amount of energy needed for the predictability part, which is next, which is coming. That's what we're seeing right now. And all these large language models getting better and better almost by the freaking week, right? I think Gemini is at top of the list with Gemini 2.5, where a couple of weeks ago it might have been, Anthropic, and then before that was ChatGPT, and then it was Llama, right? All these guys are fighting for each other, and they have to continue to develop and have the best models, which is why you're seeing all this money getting thrown into AI, because if they don't, and they stop spending, the big technology companies could lose a third of their market cap. And these days, that's like $1 trillion. So if you think they're going to stop spending, they never stop spending. You see the CapEx numbers continually. And what does it all fuel down to? The types of energy we're going to need. So the takeaways from this is, one, nuclear. I know you've been holding on to nuclear. I know uranium stocks and stuff like that, and the ups and downs went to 100. It's starting to come back. It's in the 70s now, broke 60 for briefly. You're going to need nuclear. I mean, when I showed you the charts showing when it comes to the amount of waste used from any other form of energy compared to nuclear, and how it's 24/7 base load, and how energy companies are signing deals with uranium companies to produce out to 10, 20 years from now, it's going to be there. I'm not telling you to buy uranium, you got to wait 20 years. It's going to be less than that. But if you're looking at fossil fuels, you're looking at natural gas, you're looking at even coal, right? Is there clean coal? I don't know if there's really clean coal. I mean, Scott got into it a little bit, but we know that China's going to produce a shitload of that, right? So, if you're really on board with lowering carbon emissions, it's never going to happen as long as you have China producing massively, and all the rest of the countries are okay with it. Why? Because, they produce it cheaper. How? Because they use coal and cheaper alternatives. So, lots of ideas and idea generations when I hear this, but most importantly is what I do in my podcast is I want to hear both sides of the story. Okay. Politics aside, we talked about politics a little bit, but how do you make money from this global transition into massive energy that we need? Do we need solar? Do we need wind? Yes, it could be a part, but you have to do it in an economic friendly manner, which now we're seeing more and more statistics, right? You couldn't cite these statistics in the last administration, but now you can a little bit more. But why are we not producing more oil, right? Because we know what happens when we produce more oil. It's great. Is it the best for the environment? No, that's a trade-off. So how do we make this efficient? And that's what Scott does. He travels the world to try to make it better, to explain this to people and say, hey, I'm not against solar, I'm not against wind, I'm not against hydrocarbons, I'm not against EVs, but here's the full story behind them. Because it's not as good as the environment as you think, and it's costing us a shitload and costing every other country a shitload, so much that Europe adopted this stuff tremendously, and look at their electricity costs, and now look at their economic growth and how slow it is compared to any other developed nation. So, it's interesting to see how this ties out, but this is something that I could take and I look at and saying, wow, this filters down to so many ideas about so many different parts of energy. And if you go to Switch Alliance, and it's a switchon.org, he has all of these free educational videos and interviews and things like that. I just think it's a fantastic source. I started researching this, and next thing I know, like 2-3 hours passed. I'm like, holy shit, you don't even realize it. That's how interested it was to me. Some of you may not be that interested, but just having this contact allows me to ask someone a lot of questions about new technologies, new innovations, and how do we get into the right stock picks for you guys and make you money. And hopefully you appreciate that video as much as I do, because we're going to start doing a lot more presentations, a lot more interviews on this podcast. And I hear from you. Let me know. Let me know if you know someone in the field. This is someone a lot of people don't know about, who I think is brilliant. 30, 40 years of experience. I think he added a lot to our audience and educated me at least. Let me know what you thought, Frank at CurzioResearch.com. But these are the people I want to really bring on the podcast and interview behind the scenes, people who are non-biased that could really help us, especially how I could interview someone like this, look at all his research, and come out with so many different stock ideas from it and have that great source to ask him about some of these things, because he's in the field visiting a company. He's looking at individual ideas. He's looking at investing as well, right? Which is the part we didn't get to. So really cool stuff. Again, let me know what you thought about it. Into FrankCurzioResearch.com. And as always, I'll put back to you guys soon, right? Take care.